I want to talk about space. Where is it? Where is space? Is it here? Is it there? It's a very, ironic question. Could you say it's an ironic question? We say it's ironic because it implies a contradiction. It implies a dilemma. And a dilemma is the emotional response the organism has in contrast to a contradiction. So when a conscious organism confronts a contradiction, their natural response is one of dilemma. Which choice should I pick? Because the organism is confronted with the necessity of adopting a choice, of taking a choice. You have to choose one thing over the other. Our entire existence is based on the determination of one thing and inversely the leaving out of another, or leaving out another. You exclude in the action of selecting. Alan Watts talks about this. I was just listening to him right now. It's hilarious. He his whole speech is an outline of these, dualities that necessarily presuppose one another. The two opposite sides constituting a contradiction, forming a contradiction. It's a very interesting task in philosophy that you begin as a preliminary course of action. The outline that your work will inherently involve a contradiction. It's one of the few sciences where it's honest enough to say I'm beginning from a contradiction. I'm beginning with it. And in fact, the resolution to the contradiction is really just the very realization of the contradiction itself, because it is the process of laying out the contradiction, demonstrating the contradiction, explaining why a contradiction is contradictory, why it is a contradiction. That itself is the resolution of it, That itself is the result. The result is, you proved your argument, you proved your thesis. Even if it's wrong, it's valid because you at least proved it. You outlined something that is wrong, as opposed to outlining something that is right, which is just equally the same valid argument. Now, there is obviously something right and wrong. These are categories, good and bad, universal, individual, or as Hegel derived it from the ancient Greeks, the universal and the particular. These are all dualities of existence. And this is where I want to get to. This is exactly the point I wanted to get to when I initiated this task, this speech, is that I wanted to get to an outline of one of the most fundamental contradictions there is that constitutes existence. Constitutes existence qua existence, being as a being. In philosophy, being qua being. What does it mean to really be? Being. What does it mean to be? To be or not to be is the question. Or is it the answer? It's one. Can the question be the answer? Or is that just semantics? Perhaps. But in any case, one of the most fundamental contradictions there is in philosophy, particularly ancient Greek philosophy, German idealist philosophy, modern philosophy, even postmodern philosophies, they go against these basic principles of philosophy. You see, the postmodernists don't create anything new. They claim to be the new philosophy, but they don't create anything new. They take old, ancient concepts of metaphysics and just simply, explain it in a logic that would be illogical to the original logic it was asserted from, that it was explained in. So it inverts the logic. Now what happens when you invert logic is that you actually become illogical. You see, this is the thing. This is, because the inverse of logic is, chaos or non-logic, illogic, non-reason, non-purpose, the opposite of all these concepts, unessential, unessential rather than essential. They took what is essential and defined it by what it means to define something unessential, secondary, finite, I was looking at pictures from the Hubble telescope, and those are stark images. They're incredible. I mean, they're abstractions of the universe, but really they're abstractions of just nature at the most ultimate level. Nature at a very imperceptible level, at a very high level. Meaning that at an absolute level, at an eternal level, nature at an eternal level. I have to think hard about this one. Or maybe I'm remembering a future event that's going to happen, but I'm remembering it as if it's the past. And these contradictions in time are very, very confusing from our own perceptual standpoint, because when you leave the Earth and you go out into space, you can, for example, discern the distance, for example, between the moon and between the Earth and the moon, between the Earth and Mars, between even the Earth and Jupiter. And the far out these distances, become discerned, the less discernible they become from the particular position of the Earth in relation to them. So, the position of the Earth in relation to the moon, has a certain, measure of kilometers, and that's discernible. We know that, it takes that amount of time and that amount of time to get there. To Mars it takes like a few years or whatever, a few months. To Jupiter, definitely a few years. Outside of the galaxy, 100 of years maybe, and then it goes on 1,000 years, And the more out you go in space, the less measurable it becomes to get to the particular location that is the point of destination. If you mark a place out in space and you say it's that and that amount of distance from Earth, the very position you're aiming at becomes not discernible. So when we leave out Earth and we go out into space, the question becomes, where are you in space? Out in the universe, where is your location? Is there location? For example, when you're in space, where is up, where is down, where is left and where is right? It becomes not as obvious as when in comparison you're on Earth to discern where is up. And on Earth, you're on the ground, and up is where the sky is. Sideways is where the left, and the left is where the east is. The west is where the right is. starts becoming less and less ambiguous as you go up into space. And eventually in space, when you're so far distant from everything else, it becomes indiscernible whether you are in motion or whether you are in an inertial position, whether you are not in motion, whether you're just static. It becomes very hard to pick out whether you're actually moving in space or whether you're actually not moving. And this of course reaffirms Newton's law. Newton's first law, the most primary of laws of motion. If a body is at rest or moving at a constant speed in a straight line, it will remain at rest or keep moving in a straight line at constant speed unless it is acted upon by a force. In other words, a thing continues to be moving or continues to be inept of motion or not moving unless an external force is acted upon on it. Now, acted upon on it is becomes the question. Because what does it mean to act upon something? Well, in purely physical terms, something coming into contact with something else acts upon it. So when two things are in direct impact with one another, both move in proportion to the impact, given the size, mass, density of both objects. A denser object will move a less denser object further. It requires a higher dense object to move a higher dense object. A denser object develops momentum as it moves, whereas a less dense object requires something of a higher energy force to maintain it in motion. All these inertial laws of rigidity. I call it rigidity because they are, movements within a physical plane and against that physical plane. And so when one object acts upon another by contact, we see the impact as, direct. But what if objects indirectly acts upon another object? And an object acts upon another object indirectly by gravitational force, for example. That's an indirect acting upon. And it's very interesting that the general gravitational force that one object acts on another is simply that they bear a relationship divided by distance from each other. They bear a certain distance relative to the observer from each other. And in that distance, they formulate a locked position in space, and they have a discernible sense of time. That it's moving at a certain speed around something or in relation to the thing. So, a force to act upon another force indirectly, ultimately and fundamentally, is just simply both objects having a relative relationship with one another on a space-time plane in relation to the observer. So they're within my perceptual framework. I'm conceiving the two objects together relative to each other, and that induces a context of them in relation to me. Develops context. But as you slowly disintegrate the distance between the objects and therefore change their context. What it means to occupy a position, what it means to occupy a particular period in time, what it means to, I think, being here and now, all of that changes. All of that changes. If you go up into space and you are alone relative to nothing, just space itself, you lose any contextual framework of occupying a location, you lose any measure of changing one position to another, and therefore you cannot discern whether the thing is in motion or not. You know, if you take an object in just a black plane, and you literally see it in a black plane, you don't know whether that object is in motion or just standing still. Now, you can assume things. You can assume, well, if it's just stopped, there's something that's holding it that we don't see, and that's what the general gravitational assumption presupposes. But when you say, well, if the thing is in motion, then it must have been acted upon by some external force that is somewhere not within the same, reference frame that the object is in. So we're really just witnessing a moment in the activity, or rather in the act of the thing in motion. We're seeing an event. An abstraction, a moment in time, we say. A moment in time, we say. I arrived at my moment, and I'll talk to you in another.